Welcome to Mondays with Vish. That's Vish. I'm Grant. And this is the last day of the offseason. Tomorrow, the 49ers report. I'll be there. Kyle Shanahan will be there. John Lynch will be there. And then the day after, they start practicing. And then after that, we'll kind of get lost in the details for about a month. We'll be talking about backup corners and positional battles. So we figured today we'll go big picture as kind of a last opportunity. And we're going to start by talking about James Garoppolo. He's the quarterback for this team for now. But we all know, whether it's before the season starts, at the trade deadline, or in the offseason, he's going to get moved eventually. And in that case, it'd be kind of fun to talk about or try to figure out where he's most likely to end up, because that's the way my mind thinks. So I was thinking we go through 5 teams and kind of just discuss the probability of Jimmy ending up there. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. First team. Will the Washington football team trade for Jimmy Garoppolo? And I think in this hypothetical, we're saying it's either a team trades for him like before the season starts, or during the season because Jimmy's playing well and their guy gets hurt, or after the year, after a season that is kind of like 2019 for Jimmy Garoppolo. That's kind of what we're assuming here.
So I think that the assumption here also going along with that is that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to start X amount of games this season and play well enough, right? To have.
I mean, there's a possibility a team could get desperate, like Ryan Fitzpatrick breaks his leg and they have to trade for Jimmy Garoppolo. But barring that, I guess what we're expecting is Jimmy Garoppolo plays well, and this either happens at the deadline or next year.
And he plays at a 2019 level, even if he does get Kurt Warner. You remember the Kurt Warner? They were 5-5, and they benched him to start Eli Manning, who was their rookie quarterback, which I think is a likely scenario of what could happen based on what I keep going back to, Trey Lance readiness. So even in that scenario, right, he would be playing at like a 2019 level maybe.
I almost forgot Kurt Warner played for the Giants. That's true. That did happen. He was awful on the Giants, right?
Yeah, no, he wasn't.
Was he not? Man, that was a long time ago.
He wasn't terrible.
You remember better than me. You're older than me.
He wasn't the MVP. Rams, Kurt Warner, or the Cardinals, Kurt Warner. He wasn't a bad player, though.
He just didn't have Orlando pace. Anyway.
No,
Washington.
In that under that assumption, right, he plays at a 2019 level, because to me that's really important, because one thing people do forget is even after he played at a 2019 level, that level was not good enough for the 49ers. They had conversations about replacing him even at the 2019 level.
Right. But the thing is, I think, at least what I heard, they were offered a first-round pick from New England for Jimmy Garoppolo, and I think that's why they're holding on to Jimmy. They feel that even though his value is down for 2 reasons. 1, he got hurt. 2, the pandemic happened, the cap went down. He's hard to trade now, but they feel if they're patient, if Jimmy plays like he did in 2019, the cap goes back up, all of a sudden the market could be there again.
Okay, sure. So
that's what they're hoping, thinking. Yeah.
Now that we've given context to all of this in this entire conversation, let's talk about the Washington football team. To me, Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't make sense for the Washington football team. To me, their incumbent starter, Ryan Fitzpatrick, doesn't make sense. I mean, this is a team loaded with talent on both sides of the football. Their offensive line is maybe one of their weaker spots, although Brandon Scherf, they were able to bring him back, and he's one of the best guards in the NFL. You know, he's right around the tier with the Zach Martins and the Quentin Nelsons, you know, maybe a tier under, but nobody talks about him. But he's a really, really good guard. They obviously have a killer defensive line, starting with Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, all big-time players. They drafted Jamin Davis, so now they have speed at their linebacker position. They have a good secondary that they just paid big money for William Jackson. They obviously have 2 very good wide receivers, one of the most underrated receiver duos in Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. Gibson showed something. So we're talking about a lot of pieces besides quarterback, and we say, wow, Washington is filled with a ton of talent. And the reason Garoppolo doesn't make sense to me, and the reason Ryan Fitzpatrick already doesn't make sense to me, is that to be a quarterback for a team that wants to play defense first, as teams have played with Ron Rivera in the past, you need a quarterback that's not going to turn the football over. Ryan Fitzpatrick, when he's Fitztragic, it's because he's a turnover machine.
Yes.
Jimmy Garoppolo, I mean, whatever you want to say about him, he turns the football over at a high rate. I mean, there's, I think, adjusted interceptions. Football Outsiders does the stat every year. 2019, Jimmy Garoppolo's adjusted interceptions was 17, and they adjust interceptions for what the quarterback is responsible for. So
Right.
dropped interceptions, they count as an interception. And interceptions that are the receiver's fault, where they go off the receiver's hands or through the receiver's hands, i.e. the interception in San Francisco or in Santa Clara against Seattle that went through Kendrick Bourne's hands, that would not be counted against the quarterback. He was at 17 in 2019.
Not to mention the fumbles.
Right. He had 5 fumbles, I think. And
Something
he
like
really
that,
had no reason to fumble the ball. The Baltimore game, that you should never fumble that football once the play is dead in the pocket and the guy's got hands on you. So he turns the football over too much for me to like him on a team like that. I could see why Washington maybe might make a move for him, because, you know, they have this young, cheap roster and they get this aging veteran quarterback who's proven that he can take a team, or he can be part of a team that goes to a Super Bowl, and maybe he could do a similar type thing.
Which Ryan Fitzpatrick hasn't proven.
Never. And Garoppolo's at least shown that, you know, he can be a starter. He's had multiple, actually, I wouldn't say he's had multiple seasons, but he shows enough where you think he could be a guy that could start over multiple seasons. Fitzpatrick has never proven over a longer period of time that he can actually start in the NFL. You know, he has years where he looks like a very capable starter, and then he has years where he looks like a guy that should be a career backup, and that's why he's bounced around to so many teams. So all of these things is fair. My biggest thing with Garoppolo and the Washington football team, it goes back to the turnovers, why it doesn't make sense. And then the second thing is that the Washington football team have a very young football team, right? You look at all their high marquee players. Like, you start with Brandon Sheriff is, I think, below 30 or 28 or 29. Chase Young, very young, 22 years old. Jonathan Allen, who they just gave a big contract to, he was drafted in 2017. He's a relatively younger player. Deron Payne was drafted in 2018, younger player. So you go down the list, they're a very young football team. When you have a young football team like that, I don't see why they wouldn't get a younger quarterback. And
true. Yeah, that's part of the discussion. Like, would they want Jimmy? Maybe not. There's other guys who are going to be available. Would Jimmy want to go there? It seems like this is a pretty good destination for a quarterback. Like,
I think it's a great destination.
Jimmy has a no-trade clause. I don't think he would exercise it for Washington.
See, I would if I was Jimmy, because it's a really nice spot for a quarterback, right? You have this, you want to talk about a passing game that could be geared for a short passing game with guys who can make plays after the catch. You go Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, like that stuff all fits. So I feel like for Garoppolo, it's ideal, but for Washington, it doesn't make sense. Then we go back to me, Garoppolo, just guessing for next season, is going to be the 5th best option at quarterback to sign. So Rodgers is one. I think we all agree Rodgers is going to be available in 2022, and you'd be stupid not to swing at that, right? I mean, I didn't include him, but I guess Watson, if whatever happens this year, maybe he's a 2022 mover, but then the numbers with Watson change, because 2021 and Watson is cheap. 2022 Watson is not cheap. So then that becomes a different conversation.
Let's forget about Watson for now.
Right.
Yeah. But we got Rodgers. Yeah.
The next name I would say, to me, that this is going to be Kirk Cousins last year in Minnesota, guessing. I think that with them drafting Kellen Mond, the way he fits for what their offense is, the fact that they've realized, I think Minnesota's realized that even though Kirk Cousins has played top 12, top 13 quarterback type football for them over the last 3 years, it's not good enough for them to win with the way their roster is currently constructed. They got to get cheaper at quarterback. I think Minnesota's making a concerted decision, or putting concerted effort based on their alleged interest in just moving up to get Justin Fields as well. When you look at all of that, I think Minnesota wants to get cheaper at the quarterback position. So that would be the second option.
I'm just checking out real quick. Kirk Cousins, they can trade him. They can't cut him.
Right.
They can trade him. They can trade him. And so if Washington wants Kirk Cousins, bring him back, they would have to trade for him.
Right. But I mean, this might not be Washington specific. We're going to talk about 3 other teams, but you're trading for Jimmy Garoppolo. To me, trading for Kirk Cousins is better than trading for Jimmy Garoppolo. We were talking all of this. Niners are holding out for a 1. Right. Yeah. We're talking all of this from the context of trading for Jimmy Garoppolo. So that's 2. Yeah. Then 3, if you look at every single draft since 2015, there's been 2 quarterbacks at least that teams have targeted. Whether they're there by the start of the year, they're there by the end of the year, right? You start with 2015, Mariota and Winston. Winston was always in the conversation. Mariota got himself into the conversation. Those were the 2. 16, they said there would be no quarterbacks. Goff and Wentz ended up going 1 and 2. 17, they said there would be no quarterbacks. Mahomes and Trubisky went in the top 10. 18, they said there would be a lot of quarterbacks, and 5 went in the top 10. And then 19, Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones went in the top 10, even though they thought there would be no quarterbacks. And then 2020, obviously, Burrow, Herbert, Tua all went in the top 10. And then 2021, last year, we had 3 between Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, and Trevor Lawrence. So
right now it's being projected that it's going to be Spencer Rattler and Sam Howell 1 and 2,
or Malik Willis from Liberty. There's a few names. There's no consensus guy the way Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields were talked about at this time last year.
But there are definitely
names that are thrown around. And my point is that if you look at since 2015, if you look at the odds are that 2 guys make their way to the top of this draft by the end of next year, and they're looked at as 2 viable. There's going to be at least 2 viable guys that will be drafted in the top 10, right or wrong. That's just
how the thing about Washington, though, they may not. So So you've laid out you've laid out the alternatives. He's probably the number 5 guy, but
so he's the 5th in that. Yeah,
he's probably the number 5 guy. But Washington may not be in a position to get one of the top quarterbacks in the draft because their team is so good.
Right, but I mean, again, you're going back, right? If they miss out on, let's say these are all the things that need to happen for Jimmy to be a member of the Washington football team. They have to miss out on Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. Let's say those
Rodgers might want to go there. That might be his first choice.
No, I don't know. Maybe he's talked about ownership, Dan Snyder. Okay, let's rule out Rodgers like that. Okay, Kirk Cousins, maybe he doesn't want to return to Washington after what happened. Let's rule him out. Right. There's still the option of trading up and getting a quarterback of the future to pair with this young team, pair with Ron Rivera over the long term. So that's 2 options.
Yeah.
And Ryan Fitzpatrick has to be truly, truly Fitz-tragic because if they exhaust all 4 of those first 4 options that I think we all agree would be technical upgrades over both Fitzpatrick and Garoppolo, even though Garoppolo is an upgrade relative to Fitzpatrick is making what? He has a base salary of $3 million this year, and he has a cap hit of $10 million. Okay, so he's making about $10 million this year. If you can bring him back for a second,
he can run.
Right? If he's okay this year, and you go through those first 4 options and they don't happen, wouldn't you rather just bring back Fitzpatrick for another year just because you have the advantage of at least continuity? That's where I sit here and say, like, sure, Garoppolo is better than Fitzpatrick in a vacuum. There's no doubt about that. But continuity is part of this conversation. And I think that in that scenario that, you go through like that.
It looks unlikely. It seems to me the most likely way Jimmy ends up in Washington is if they get out to a hot start this year with Fitzpatrick. And then Fitzpatrick gets hurt. And they're in a position where they want to win this season and they don't feel they can do it with Kyle Allen. And all of a sudden they make a trade for Jimmy Garoppolo to win this year. That could happen. But again, I guess, that could happen anywhere. If someone gets hurt, they get desperate for Jimmy G. That's kind of where we're looking unlikely for Washington after the first inspection. Okay, let's move on. Red and Gold says Jimmy G to the Broncos in 2022. Is Drew Lock in a make or break year? Year 3, might Rodgers want to go to the Broncos? Okay, let's go to the Denver Broncos. Will Denver trade for Jimmy Garoppolo?
No. I'm going to say no.
Why?
I mean, first, you look at the history of Denver quarterback. I mean, the only quarterback but not just that. The only quarterback I can think of that had arm talent similar to Garoppolo is Jake Plummer.
Bridgewater. Well, yeah, Jake.
I mean, Drew Lock has a hose. Drew Lock has real serious arm talent.
He really does.
Peyton Manning, end of his career, obviously, it's worse arm talent than both Garoppolo and Plummer, but Peyton Manning in 2013, even off the neck, could make every throw. Then you look at Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler had an absolute cannon. Kyle Orton had a decent arm. It wasn't anything special, but he had a decent arm. So you go through their quarterbacks, it just doesn't make sense when you look at Denver's history with the physical profile of their quarterback, right? That's one thing. Then the second thing is they have Teddy Bridgewater on the roster right now, and Teddy Bridgewater has a cap hit of $4 million, okay?
Yeah.
That's cheap. That's very cheap, right?
Yeah.
And then this goes back to the same conversation.
Cheaper than Trey Lance.
Right?
Yeah.
This goes back to the same conversation as Fitzpatrick. Is Jimmy better than Teddy Bridgewater? No doubt. Undoubtedly better than Teddy Bridgewater. But if you can re-sign Teddy Bridgewater again 1 more year for $4 million to kind of act like a bridge, that changes the conversation. Second, and this is
you don't have to commit to Teddy Bridgewater. You have to kind of commit to Jimmy Garoppolo. You have to trade for him. You have to take on his cap hit and extend it or do something.
Right, because this is the conversation we're having. Second, it goes back to the same thing. I think Denver would prefer Kirk Cousins. I think Denver would prefer Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers first. That would be probably their ideal option. And then let's say the two prospect quarterbacks X and Y. Let's call them, for the sake of this exercise, quarterbacks X and Y.
Yes.
If Denver, all things go wrong, they're going to be drafting one of those two guys. They might have the opportunities to get quarterback X and Y, right? So that's two things, okay? But here's the most important thing, Grant. Denver, we talked about the make or break season for Drew Lock. It's also a make or break season for Vic Fangio, right?
True.
And they have a veteran defense. But here's the thing. If you go and hire the next coach, right, whoever is going to be the next coach for the Denver Broncos, could you see that next coach coming in, looking at the roster and saying that the solution to the entire offense and everything is go get Jimmy Garoppolo? That's where I have big question marks. And if Vic Fangio is not gone and you don't have the next coach, then it's likely that you got something out of Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater that made you make the playoffs. And all of a sudden you have an opportunity, where you might want to run it back with one of them. So to me, like, Denver just seems like, in theory, just because Garoppolo is better than their two quarterbacks they have on their roster, it feels like it fits. But then when you take into account price, you take into account previous quarterback interest, and you take into account just a variety of different things like this coach aspect, like which coach besides Josh McDaniels do you think is going to want to bring in Jimmy Garoppolo as his incumbent starter for the 2022? And there's no way Josh McDaniels is back in Denver. So
no, if you got a new coach, like, you either want Aaron Rodgers or a rookie.
Deshaun Watson. Or a rookie.
Yeah. You don't want Kirk Cousins unless your name's Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah. Or if you're going to go for the Garoppolo route, you want to go for the cheapest guy within that tier. It doesn't matter if Garoppolo is better than Bridgewater. You just want the cheapest guy of those guys, right? It doesn't matter, because Bridgewater's not the future. Garoppolo's not the future. Goff's not the future. Whoever you want to name in that style of quarterback, especially Garoppolo's the best of them, in my opinion. He's better than Goff. He's better than Bridgewater, these guys. I think he's the most starter worthy of those guys. At the same time, I still wouldn't want to walk in Garoppolo at, $15 million, a cushy little price, and be like, all right, Garoppolo, do the Mike Glennon treatment, Andy Dalton this year at $10 million, the Sam Bradford treatment. I wouldn't want to do that. I think that's just bad for your franchise. I think you just want to, if you're not set at the quarterback position in your new regime, you just want the cheapest player possible starting.
So who do you think will be Denver's starting quarterback in 2022? Best guess.
I think Drew Lock is going to have a decent season.
Okay. Fair enough.
I think I like Drew Lock's talent. Now, Drew Lock was really, really bad last year. There's no doubt about it. But I just think there's so much right for him where he can be kind of decent and Denver can make the playoffs. And because he's a young guy in a rookie deal, he might get a chance one more year.
And if it's not him, it's like if Aaron Rodgers forces his way out and wants to move close to the West Coast or something like that.
Right.
So again, we're saying unlikely for Jimmy Garoppolo in Denver. Do you think it's a place that he would want to go?
Yeah.
Or would he say no trade for them? I mean, they do have Jerry Jeudy.
Look, Grant. I feel like Garoppolo's no trade. I feel like it's a position of zero power at this point, because he might have to just go to a place that's going to give him an opportunity to start, right? Like, this notion, I feel like everybody's just somehow bought in for whatever reason. And I see this on Twitter too many times. There's a little bit of, and to be fair, it's also my fault for being on that cesspool and reading these things and, getting aggravated about it. But it almost feels like people are acting like, what's his name? Garoppolo was the quarterback that they just traded up 2 first-round picks and then Lance is just some guy that they picked. No, you don't understand. Like, you're talking about like Garoppolo. Somehow people are talking about this as if Garoppolo just has this job set in stone, right? And he's gonna just walk in and it's like a birthright for him. It's a birthright for him. And it's actually aggravated me a little bit because it's a little hypocritical, because the guy's played 32 games in his career with the Niners, but somehow with him, he's earned every single thing that's come to him. When, a Jaquiski Tartt, who had an all-pro type season in 2017, has a couple more injury-filled years, and fans are ready to replace him, even though he's played at a level that Garoppolo's never played at his position. Jimmy Ward, another guy, had some injuries, and people were ready to replace him. And he was a little more inconsistent, but so it aggravates me from that standpoint too. I just think it's unfair, but I think that it's very important that this conversation be had, to be honest with you, because again, I'm going to keep repeating it until it sets into people's brain. When you trade 2 first-round picks, swap a third one, and trade a third-round pick to go get a quarterback within the top 5 of the draft, and you do it 1 month before the draft so that you have the right to study 2 more quarterbacks in depth so you can eventually make a decision on who you're picking, that means that guy's you want that guy to be your starting quarterback. You don't draft him
really
so that you
don't
can
want the other guy
develop
to be
him
your
2
starting
years from
quarterback.
now. Right.
You really don't want Jimmy Garoppolo.
You don't want him.
Yeah. Okay, so before we move on, I wanted to ask you at the end of the Washington one, who do you think Washington's quarterback will be in 2022? It's a tough one.
That's so hard.
That's a tough one.
Because like Denver, I said Drew Lock, right? But then I'm also thinking maybe Rodgers won't end up wanting to go there. But like if Rodgers is there, then it's Rodgers, or wherever Watson goes, it's Watson, whatever. Sure. So I think that Washington football team's quarterback, I'm going to say rookie. Why not?
Okay. Okay. How about the New Orleans Saints? Will they trade for Jimmy Garoppolo? And let me just make the case first before you say one way or another. The case would be, obviously they're not going to do it now, but they're going to give Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill a shot this year. I'm thinking they're probably going to go with Taysom Hill, but one way or another, if one guy struggles, the other guy will get a chance. If both guys kind of flop and neither one looks like the franchise quarterback, Jimmy played well against them. His arm strength wouldn't be as big of an issue in the dome. Same thing that happened with Drew Brees. He went to the
Eastern Illinois.
He went to the same school as Sean Payton. That's the pitch. Good offensive line, good team. I mean, they can prop him. He doesn't make other players better, but they can make him better.
Yeah, so
and he might be an upgrade over Taysom Hill.
Yeah, the same system makes sense, right? That's a system Jimmy Garoppolo can play in, and that's a coordinator that would be able to utilize his best skill sets, which is being able to throw with bodies around him and his very quick release, right?
Yes.
Those are his 2 skill sets that fits exactly with what Sean Payton does on offense. It all makes sense. They have Michael Thomas, who, whenever he's healthy, is a top 5 receiver in the NFL. Alvin Kamara is a baller. You talked about a great offensive line, good defense too. Really, they've had a good defense the last 3 years. Dennis Allen's a good coordinator. But I think it goes back to a point of which we talk about in a different show. I just don't think Sean Payton's bought into having a pocket quarterback anymore. I think a lot of his love interest with Taysom Hill is the fact that
I think a lot of offensive coaches are like this right now, man.
Yeah. The things that you can do with the quarterback in the run game has changed everything. Yes. And I think Sean Payton's very intrigued by it. If Sean Payton was into, I mean, can we be honest about something real quick? Drew Brees is probably the best case scenario for a quarterback who, especially his last few years, with waning arm strength and waning mobility, he's the best case scenario because of how accurate and smart he is, right? Garoppolo at any point in his career is not going to be as mature or accurate or smart as Drew Brees the last 2 years.
And he still wasn't good enough.
Drew Brees was the reason that Saints team has not won a Super Bowl in the last 4 years. Yeah. Let's be honest about it.
He was never good in the playoffs. I mean,
he did not play well. He did not play well.
Even
the
at
Saints
home.
had the best roster in the NFL over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And you can talk about Bill Vinovich not making the call. Drew Brees was pathetic versus the Rams in that game. He was awful. He was terrible in overtime in that game. The first game, the Minnesota Miracle, the year before, the Saints had a really good roster. Maybe a bit too young to not make it. Drew Brees played really bad against the Vikings in the first half of that game. He was terrible versus Kirk Cousins and the Vikings 2 years ago. And he was awful versus the Bucs last year. Drew Brees did not play well in the playoffs. So if you're Sean Payton, right, you've stayed at New Orleans over an extended period of time, and you're trying to win a Super Bowl, right? And why would you bring in now Garoppolo and try to rerun a worse thing of what hasn't worked the last 4 years? They went 3-1 with Taysom Hill last year, albeit one game was against Deshaun Hamilton starting. Is that his name? The wide receiver who played quarterback? He started one game for Denver in that.
Yeah.
And they did lose a game to Jalen Hurts, which is rough. But Taysom Hill, I mean, all the stats people love, but they don't use him with Taysom Hill. He completed 70% of his passes last year.
He did.
70%.
His numbers look good. His numbers look good, yeah.
Yeah. He had you go down his passing stats, like I'm not saying Taysom Hill's a good quarterback, but the stats people use to make arguments for other quarterbacks, if you apply it to what Taysom Hill did in his short stint starting last year, then there should be no reason why he shouldn't be given a chance. And maybe there's this possibility that he could be pretty good. So honestly, just looking at it, I think New Orleans, the fact that Peyton seems intrigued by the quarterback run game, the fact that, even though Garoppolo is probably a better quarterback than both Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston, there's no doubt about that. But then when you take into account price, you take into account fit, you take into account the fact that at some point the Saints are going to have to answer this quarterback question or this salary cap situation that they keep pushing down the road with in a million of different creative ways. And when they do have to answer that, you don't want the albatross that is Jimmy Garoppolo's contract.
Yeah, let's be real clear. They can't sign. They can't trade for Jimmy anytime soon.
Yeah,
this would have to be next year after some creative ways to, because they have no cap. They have like $8 in cap space.
Right.
Yeah.
And we are talking from the scenario. Somebody said Teddy has, or DSF 49ers said Teddy won games. Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater went 5-0. Yeah, he didn't just win games. He went 5-0. We also talked about the thing that also, and I want to keep saying it because people will miss it, is that we are talking about the scenario that he gets traded, not gets cut. If he gets cut,
and that could happen too.
Yeah, this changes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so New Orleans Saints, we're saying most likely not. I think what's interesting is the idea that maybe an offensive coach wouldn't want Jimmy Garoppolo in 2021, 2022. Maybe the kind of coach who would appreciate him, his wins, his big picture success as a defensive coach.
Yeah, leader.
Something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Right, leader.
Yeah.
Like people talk about his leadership-like ability, all of those things. A defensive coach might view that maybe. Now we're getting more into a little bit of the emotional part of football, and it's always difficult to project those type things. But I think that does make sense.
Yeah. So who do you think will be the quarterback for the Saints in 2022? Best guess.
I think it'll be Taysom Hill.
I think it'll be Taysom Hill too. I think Sean Payton's so committed.
That's one thing. The other thing is I think the Saints are going to make the playoffs. Like, what about the Saints roster has gotten that much worse from last year to this year? It's still stacked top to bottom. Sean Payton is still calling the plays. They went 3-1 with Taysom Hill last year. And if you think the quarterback is that much of a drop-off, you did not watch a lot of Drew Brees last year. I mean, Drew Brees struggled versus the 49ers last year. He was awful in that game.
He was awful, and so was Jameis Winston, in my opinion. San Fran 49er fan says Hill can only read one side of the field at a time. Winston will be quarterback one. What do you think?
How many sides of the field does Garoppolo read at the time?
Does Winston read any sides of the field?
No, Winston does. The thing with Winston, look, I don't care if Winston's QB1. And obviously, Winston's kind of a crappy person, so it's difficult to root for him because he has had some ugly instances in his past that, you shouldn't root for somebody like that. But the one thing I will say is when you look at Winston's talent and the things that he can do occasionally, there are enough plays in a game. I mean, even if you go back to him on the Bucs, where Jameis Winston looks like a legitimate top 10 quarterback in the NFL with the way he moves through his progressions, the way he's able to anticipate and know where to go with the football and ultimately making a big time throw down the field. Like, he's capable of doing that. The problem is there's enough plays in the game where Jameis Winston doesn't look like a guy that should ever be starting in the NFL.
Yeah, he loses too many games for you. Yeah.
Right. And if you want to make the assumption that Sean Payton is somehow going to be able to fix that issue, and let's say he does, then the Saints will have a top 15 quarterback in the NFL, and this conversation will be absolutely.
But you just have to remember, they're coming from a place where they can go 5-0 with Teddy Bridgewater, so they don't need super firepower at quarterback. They need a dude who won't commit 30 turnovers.
Right.
Yeah, good call. There was one. Oh no, that's it. All right, let's move on. New England. That's where he came from. They have a defensive coach. Bill Belichick has said over and over again how much he loves him. Now, they have Cam Newton, but they're not committed to him. And they drafted Mac Jones, but they didn't trade up for him. Who knows? Maybe if they could have gotten Jimmy Garoppolo before the draft, they wouldn't have drafted Mac Jones. So do you think there's any chance that Jimmy could go home?
No way. They drafted Mac Jones. I don't see how this would be a possibility unless Mac Jones is the worst quarterback draft pick of all time.
So it would require Mac Jones sucking.
Yeah, but look at New England's situation. You want to talk about a good situation for a quarterback, Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick, especially Josh McDaniels, hell of a play caller. Really, it's a good offense for a quarterback to be in. Talk about a run game. Damian Harris looked very good at the end of last year. The New England Patriots hidden thing last year, a season that was a giant down here for the New England Patriots. Didn't they go 8-8?
Mm-hmm.
They went 8-8 or 7-9.
Well, last year,
they had a better record than the 49ers.
7-9, I think,
They had a better record than the 49ers, and this was with 6 opt-outs, 7 guys on IR, Cam Newton getting COVID, all of that. They still managed to win quite a few football games. And why did they manage to do that? at the end of last year, they found a way to run the football. And they did it because they have an excellent offensive line, and it's going to be good again last year, even without Joe Tooney. You know, when you look at David Andrews, Trent Brown played well for them. I'm assuming he's going to be, you know, another Jamie Collins type where he goes somewhere else, not so good, comes back, plays good football for them. So their offensive line is going to be good. Damian Harris looked real good at the end of the season. Cam Newton still had, 700 yards rushing and 12 rushing touchdowns last year. Those things count in rushing stats. They are part of what a quarterback does. Cam Newton's still a good runner, maybe one of the best red zone running options still in the NFL. So that is part of it. They got better at receiver. They got better at tight end. Then you look at their defense. Dante Hightower is only going to make that defense better. If you look at all the things Dante Hightower can do for that defense, he's going to make them a lot better. Then you look at their draft pick. Yes, he opted out. Then they drafted Christian Barmore. One of their biggest problems last year was they didn't have size at defensive tackle. Christian Barmore helps fix that problem. Then you go through their entire list where if Stephon Gilmore doesn't come back, I mean, we've seen Bill Belichick. He really does work his magic. He's the cornerback whisperer, and he finds ways to get guys to play really well in man coverage. They do so many creative things on defense. So when you look at all of that and you insert Mac Jones in there, Mac Jones is in my opinion, the second best position for a quarterback after Trey Lance.
Okay,
let's go Bill Belichick, Josh McDaniels, defense, offensive line, all that. Let me try
to make the case because you're dismissing this, and let me just make sure that there's nothing here. Like, let's say they go with Cam Newton this year and they go 7-10. Okay, it works sometimes, but they don't win. All right, they go 7-10 or 8-9 or whatever, and they want to move on because Belichick. Let's say Tampa wins another Super Bowl. You know, Belichick's getting antsy. He wants to freaking win and show that he can win without Tom Brady. So he moves on from Cam, and he feels Mac's not ready. Like, I don't think I'm going to win with Mac. Would he do it in that case? I mean, like, we can bring in Jimmy, have him for a year. You know, he'll play out the last year of his contract, pay him $27 million, but it's 1 year.
So I'm not. That's fair. That is a case. It just feels very unlikely to me. That's the
fair enough. Fair enough.
That's just how I feel about it.
Fair enough. Okay.
So I think it's
unlikely for it seems like they've kind of moved on, right?
I think once they drafted Mac Jones, that door really closed.
Okay. One more team real quick that I want to talk about before we move on to the last team. One that I think I would dismiss, you would dismiss. Someone brought it up. Houston.
Maybe. Actually, I wouldn't rule that one out.
Okay, let's talk about it then. Houston. Will the 49ers trade Jimmy Garoppolo to the Houston Texans?
The problem is, again, Houston's in a situation where I think they would want to go cheap at quarterback. So, like, it all depends on if you trade him, what do you do with Garoppolo's contract? But then if Houston was the team to trade for him, they're not giving up anything big. They're giving up like a 5th or a 6th round pick and just having him start a year as they try to figure out what the direction of their organization is and do they have very many talented players to build around? Because right now they don't. Besides Zach Cunningham, I don't think I look up and down Houston's roster and see a player that you should be even excited about, honestly.
Yes, to me, if I were Jimmy Garoppolo's agent, if I were advising him, that would be the one team I would say veto that. You don't want to go there. You don't want any part of that organization. If he goes there. You don't want any part of that organization. I honestly feel like he would. Maybe already has vetoed a trade to the Texans that we have. I mean, why would you want to go there, man? Go somewhere else.
Yeah,
because they're just desperate. It's not like they're just desperate, and they.
I don't know what he would do. Like, I guess that's a scenario, but I can't see. Like, again, the problem is that we keep having this conversation from the standpoint that there's going to be a reasonably high pick given, and Garoppolo's contract is going to be maintained because the team's going to trade him and have him as their incumbent starter, whether it's in 2022 or they're desperate for a starter in 2021.
Houston would do it now.
Texans, but Houston would do it now for what, like a 6th round pick, because they don't have any assets really to trade.
Right, and it's not like they have any expectations of competing. So what's the point? Right,
not this. They don't have expectations to compete this year, next year, or the year after that.
Right.
Once Deshaun Watson is gone, there's like one talented player on this roster.
And they have Davis Mills, so what's the? No, I don't think Houston makes sense. I don't think he would want to be there. I don't think they necessarily would look at him as a top option. So let's look at the last team that I think is realistic, Miami. Do you think the Miami Dolphins would trade for Jimmy Garoppolo, say this offseason, next offseason, 2022?
I think Miami is unlikely in a sense. But I think Miami's the team that I can kind of concoct a case that kind of makes sense to me, if that makes sense. So bear with me for a second.
Sure.
I think where Miami falls in is that you could get the Ryan Tannehill scenario with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I'm not saying Garoppolo will end up playing as well as Ryan Tannehill, but you could take the same
It's a
approach.
blueprint.
Like,
it's a blueprint.
Right?
Yes.
Like, so but this is also a 2022 move, not a 2021 move. So you go through 2021, Tua doesn't look good again, right? Tua doesn't look like that guy. He doesn't look much better than how he looked in his rookie season. There's still questions about whether he can function within the pocket, especially function within the pocket with pressure, because that's a big problem. In Alabama, he used to just run out of that pocket when there was a slightest bit of pressure and create space for him. And because he played like that, he got injured a lot because he took hits that he was not athletic enough to avoid. And now in the NFL, he's less athletic because of his injury, so he can't run out of it, and he does not function with bodies around him well.
And the speed of the game is faster. He didn't do it at
Alabama, right? He didn't do it his rookie year in Miami. Let's say that stays the same. Well, now Miami has the assets,
and I think
they have a coaching staff with Brian Flores, who's familiar with Tua. You have all of that, and what you could do
with Jimmy
is with Jimmy, not Tua. Excuse me.
I got
familiar with Tua too, technically.
Yeah.
But familiar with Jimmy, and what you could do is you could trade. I mean, again, this wouldn't be a high pick. This would be like a 3rd or 4th round pick. Maybe have the Niners pay half his salary the way Tennessee made Miami do it back in the day. Have Jimmy be on the last year of his contract, have it be like a 1-year, $8 million deal, and make Tua the starter, and have Jimmy come in and be your high priced if Tua doesn't perform. Because at that point, that roster, there will be pressure on that roster to win. Even with those assets, if Brian Flores doesn't have a winning season in 2021, they'll have 3 losing seasons with a team that allegedly looked like they really turned it around. Or didn't have a losing season last year, sorry. They would have 3 non-playoff seasons. And with a team that really looked like they turned around the roster in a division that has Josh Allen, and, who knows, maybe Robert Saleh does something with the Jets and the Jets look good, there will be a ton of pressure on them to win. So they wouldn't risk it going with Tua year 3 and give them one more chance. There would just be too much pressure on them to win. And that, to me, is a scenario that makes sense. And then maybe Jimmy has a resurgence in Miami. Tua plays 4 games like Mariota isn't good. And then Jimmy comes in and plays really good football. They have Jalen Waddle. Will Fuller is there. Devontae Parker is still a solid player. I mean, they have an offensive line with a bunch of talent invested in it. If that talent performs, it could be a good offensive line. They have a good defense. I like Flores as a coach. I like Flores as a defensive coordinator. Right, good tight end. Gasecki's a hell of a player.
Yeah,
so
good wide receiver.
If you're gonna make a case, to me, Miami is the
most
case
likely
that I can kind of make up.
Yeah.
But even then, I look at Miami and I say, if Tua doesn't work out, Miami has so many assets. Why wouldn't they just trade up and try to get the next quarterback? Maybe they have some sort of fear because of what happened with Tua.
They have a ton
Miami
of assets,
has the assets to make the move and go get their guy. They have the assets to make a move at Deshaun
How'd they get these
right
assets
now.
again? Remind me. What'd they do? How'd they do this?
Oh, they traded Laramie Tunsil.
Bingo. Gotcha. Thank you. So they got extra first.
Yeah. Not from the Niners though. Only from Laramie Tunsil.
I got it. So they could get whoever they want. And they're a good
Watson.
team.
They're still in the best spot to get Watson. I mean, if they can get Watson, why can't they get Rodgers?
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, Jimmy Garoppolo goes somewhere, I guess. It seems like we're thinking the most likely scenario, the ones we've presented, is Miami, but at the same time, there's problems with that too. So I don't know.
You know what I think is the most likely scenario, Grant?
Tell me.
And unfortunately, we couldn't bring up this scenario because of the context we had this conversation within. I think the most likely scenario is that he inevitably ends up getting cut and he signs as a backup somewhere, 1 year, like $8 million, highly paid backup.
Next year or this year?
Yeah, next year.
Yeah.
And if he gets
the
opportunity
Jones
to play again, maybe he plays. Maybe he's Mac Jones' backup.
He could be Mac Jones' backup.
Mac Jones' backup. But I don't see any scenario where he's traded for to be a starter in 2022. That just doesn't make sense. You don't do that for 31-year-old guys who are paid more than what their actual value is, who have injury issues, aren't mobile, and yeah.
Okay. Jay says, hey, Grant, glad you're on YouTube. Guys, Jimmy starts first 4 to 5 games, and then we cut or trade him through unlikely to be suitors unless injuries. Yeah, well, if there's injuries, That could change everything. We'll see what happens. There's been some really weird injuries this year with Achilles, like across leagues, because I don't know. So we'll see. All right, that's enough of our quarterback conversation. We want to switch it up. I started some fights on Twitter this weekend unintentionally. I didn't mean to. I just was trying to get a little engagement early in the morning before I went out with my wife, and I just posted a couple tweets and then didn't look at my phone. And people were like arguing amongst themselves for days. So that's fun. Let's talk about those topics. If Niner fans are that passionate, let's go for it. Let's start with Debo. Is Debo Samuel a glorified running back? I've seen this take from a lot of 49er fans. A lot of people seem to feel this way, and it's obvious why. It's how the Niners use him. He's almost as much a running back as he is as he is a wide receiver, or at least that's how they've used him so far. Would you say that he's a glorified running back?
Yeah, so I also saw this conversation on Twitter. Saw it at a totally different time than you. I saw it about 2 a.m. Central Time last night. I finally scrolled through Twitter. I hadn't been on Twitter all weekend. And I finally scrolled through Twitter, and I see this just outrage. And everybody who knows me knows my favorite football player in the NFL is Debo Samuel. So there was a tiny bit of emotional reaction from me, like, wow, how can you say this? So let's get into this conversation. No, he's not a glorified running back. Like, I don't. First of all,
that's a little harsh. It's a little harsh.
That's so harsh. I don't understand that. And it could be said it could have been just said in exaggeration, whatever. But I think the entire concept, because I feel like it's not just the first person that said it. I saw enough people agreeing with this take. Just makes no sense to me. Like, glorified running back.
He's built like a running back. He could play running back, but the reason he's a wide receiver is because he can do that too. I mean, he's fast.
Unbelievably explosive off the start. He's unbelievably explosive off the line of scrimmage. There aren't that many people that have his ability to change direction and explode off the line of scrimmage quickly. If you want the best example of Debo Samuel's ability at the line of scrimmage, please. I mean, I think Senior Bowl one-on-one highlights are available on YouTube. Yeah. Go watch what he did to Rock Ya-Sin in the Senior Bowl.
It was bad.
He abuses Rock Ya-Sin, who was picked 33rd overall. He was picked before Debo Samuel by everybody's favorite GM, Chris Ballard.
True.
Who Matt Eberflus, they play a system where their corners play at the line of scrimmage. So Rock Ya-Sin, you would assume, right? They play cover two. So corners play at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
That's why they had Xavier Rhodes, who had success there.
Yeah.
So what does that mean, Grant? That means what? Rock Ya-Sin is probably pretty good at the line of scrimmage because he fits that physical profile. I haven't watched a lot of
very strong dude, good at tackling.
Right. I'm starting to connect dots here. Debo Samuel killed him. I don't know any running back that's killing Rock Ya-Sin the way Debo Samuel did at the line of scrimmage.
And Debo Samuel has really worked other, like Shaquille Griffin.
Yeah,
who's a very highly paid corner. Yeah.
And that's the play I always go back to. I did this topic last year, actually, during the season about Debo. And I go back to that play when Jimmy Garoppolo underthrew him by half a yard on the play that probably finishes it in OT. Debo Samuel just straight up beat Shaq Griffin with just speed down the field, right? It was a straight go route, and Debo Samuel just straight beat him. And that's where, like, you don't, first of all, you have to be a very good receiver to beat starting caliber cornerbacks on straight go balls, right? Like, not every receiver does that. Like, it's very difficult because that's literally, I'm a better athlete than you on the outside, and I'm going to beat you. And that's what Debo Samuel did. And he created half a yard of separation. Then he beat Shaq Griffin on a corner out. He had his way with Shaq Griffin both times they play him. Go back and watch the second Arizona game, what he did to Patrick Peterson. He abused Patrick Peterson. So Debo Samuel, to me, that argument doesn't make sense. Then you want to go back to usage, right? Like, sure, is he used often in a more unconventional sense than wide receivers? Yeah. But why does that change anything? Why does that change anything?
Yeah.
Like, how does it make you? And this is where I don't get it. Are you a worse receiver if you get 120 yards catching
it's the same thing in basketball? Like, you have to have the pull-up mid-range game, or you're not a complete basketball player. Like, shut up. There's a million ways to play. There's a million ways to play wide receiver. You don't have to be Kobe Bryant to be a great basketball player. You don't have to be a
great scorer.
You don't have to be freaking AJ Brown to be a great wide receiver. There's no right way to play the game.
Even AJ Brown, if you go back and look at AJ Brown's, like, obviously Debo Samuel lives off of digs, he lives off of drift routes, and he lives then off of, behind the line of scrimmage theatrics. you go look at A.J. Brown's production, especially his first year, his rookie season, this is a secret, Grant. Don't tell anybody this, but A.J. Brown lived off of in-breaking routes. He actually struggled to run out-breaking routes as a rookie. I want to see if I still have this stat. I might not have it anymore, but there was a stat with A.J. Brown that, like, I think 70-something% of his yards as a rookie came on in-breaking routes. Well, what does Debo say? Well, Debo Samuel was a very good runner of digs. He's a very good runner of the drift route. I mean, drift concept, very famous in Shanahan's concept, in Shanahan's offense. Well, the drift concept's also really, really popular in the Arthur Smith offense. They lived off of that play action, and Tannehill was really, really good at throwing that route to A.J. Brown. So there's another point of this. And then going back to this entire point of, is he a glorified running back? Like you went to the conversation, you said basketball, you have to have this pull-up mid-range jumper. I actually don't get that, right? Like we don't discredit Randy Moss. Like nobody sits here and says Randy Moss wasn't a great middle of the field route runner, right? Yeah.
He didn't play the position the right way.
Yeah. So Randy Moss.
So all his numbers don't count. Yeah.
I think Tyreek Hill is the best receiver in football. If you were going by the technicalities, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, these kind of guys are more complete in terms of the technicalities of the receiver position than Tyreek Hill. Sorry, Tyreek Hill is just more explosive. He's more faster. He's better with the ball. Or he's faster, not more faster. He's better with the ball in his hands. He's got a higher vertical, and he just makes more big plays. So, yeah, he's a better wide receiver than all of those guys, in my opinion. And he's not as complete as those guys, even though he's good. So I just don't understand this conversation with Debo. I don't get it at all. I think there's enough shown between what he did in South Carolina and what he's done early in the NFL where this shouldn't really even be a topic. And even if he is a glorified running back, guess what? That glorified running back single-handedly won a game against the best defense in the NFL twice. He did it against the Rams twice. And you go back and look at look at the target breakdowns when him and Ayuk played on the field together, right? Ayuk's biggest game, I would say, with Debo on the field, and I'm doing this off the top of my head because I never had a chance to be able to go check the actual box scores, is Buffalo.
Yeah.
And Buffalo was a game that I think a lot of people had the conversation of why didn't Debo Samuel get the ball enough? Because you were coming off of a game against the Rams where he single-handedly won the game for you late down the stretch. And if you go back and watch the film, McDermott and that Leslie Frazier and that defensive coaching staff did a lot of really, really creative things to take Debo Samuel away from that football
because
game.
They saw him as the
right.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you go down the list and you look at the games that the two of them played together. I mean, the New England game, I would say, was pretty even, but there was still a focal point on this kind of stretching the defense horizontally. And when you're stretching a defense horizontally, nobody on this offense does it better than Debo Samuel. He attacks the perimeter with such force, violence, and explosion that I would say he does that better than anybody. You look at the first Rams game, Debo Samuel was the best player on the field. You look at the second Rams game, Debo Samuel was the best player on the field. The Dolphins game, nobody really did anything. You go down the list. Even the Washington game where Brandon Ayuk had a very good game, and they lost because of 2 turnovers. Well, their game plan went out the window when Debo Samuel injured his hamstring on the first play of the game. So I don't understand this. I didn't understand this conversation. I don't like it as a Debo fan. It makes no sense to me. And even if you can make like maybe a case, even though I don't think you can, that he's a glorified, quote unquote, glorified running back, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because as I've made the case before, he is still the most important player on this offense.
He does play wide receiver with a running back style. Kittle plays tight end with the running back style with the ball in their hands. But if he stays healthy, Debo, I mean, he's going to be making $15-16 million a year, which is not running back money. That's wide receiver money. No. So let's end it right there. San Fran 49er fan says Debo has hamstrung, pun intended, by Jimmy G. Yeah, I think that's more where the limitations come from, not necessarily from him. Real quick, Gavin says he wants to know why I'm not doing Twitch tonight. I got to do a whole new schedule now that the season's coming back and Zoom is over. Now we're going back in person. So I'm figuring out how I'm going to do Twitch. I'm thinking, at least during training camp, what I'm going to do is
Twitch on the drive back.
Yeah, I'm not on the drive back, no. But what I'll do is I'll do YouTube and I'll give you all my observations. I'll go live. I'll talk. I'll answer questions. But then after that, I'll do 45 minutes on Twitch and we can have a group discussion because you guys might have other questions and it might be effective that way. So I'm going to be doing a lot of Twitch, just not today. And I'll let you know in the Discord what the schedule is. I'm still inventing it is the answer, but I'll let you know.
Speaking of which, the Discord, the Korean 49ers asked me to give him a shout out. So there it is.
Yeah. E. Kim. Appreciate you. All right. Moving on. This was another argument I saw a lot. So Debo, just a running back, a glorified running back. Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver 1 on this team. As in the guy, the go-to guy on this team. And people say that because at a lot of times he was last year. Kittle was out, Debo was out, Ayuk caught a lot of passes. Does that mean that he's going to be wide receiver 1, the go-to guy in 2021?
No. People need to get their expectations in order with Brandon Ayuk. When everybody's healthy, the go-to receiving target on this team is George Kittle.
Correct.
There's no doubt about that.
No doubt.
It's George Kittle.
Has to be.
Yeah, it's not even close, no matter how good Brandon Ayuk looked as a rookie. It's George Kittle. That's how they pay him. That's how good he is, and he deserves to be that. So that to me, I guess I can see where people come from. Like in the most conventional sense, Brandon Ayuk is the receiver 1. He's going to line up as the X receiver on the outside, probably 80% of the time. Mm-hmm. He's going to be the guy that sees the number 1 cornerbacks. He's going to line up outside, and he's going to run the most receiver routes. He's going to run a blaze out like Julio Jones did. He's going to run, a varied right
double
route
moves.
Right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make him the number 1 receiving target. The best route runner on this team 2 years ago was who, Grant?
Dante Pettis.
Emmanuel Sanders.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you meant 3 years ago. Sorry.
Yeah. But does that make Emmanuel Sanders their number 1 receiving target? No. It was still George Kittle. And then Debo really caught on at the end of the season. It became Debo's second. So Ayuk is, Pettis was the X receiver at the end of his rookie season, and he finished it strong too. And so,
a lot of people thought he was going to be wide receiver 1.
A lot of people thought not just receiver 1, he was going to be a superstar.
Yes, absolutely. That he was just different. He moved different, Vish.
Yeah. So, I think that there is a little bit, and this is going to kind of go away from this topic. I do think there's a little bit of over expectations with Brandon Ayuk. I think I've seen conversations go a little too far in terms of who Ayuk is. Like Niners fans really think Ayuk is the next Julio Jones based on the way I see it.
Or the next Jerry Rice. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'd like to temper that expectation just because, Julio Jones is maybe the freakiest athlete to ever play the receiver position. He's in that type of a conversation.
You can see like the logic. It's like, well, George Kittle, even though he's going to lead the team in targets, he's technically a tight end. And Debo Samuel, even though he's could get more touches than Brandon Ayuk this season, he's a glorified running back because he carries the ball so much. So that by default, Brandon Ayuk is the number 1 wide receiver on this team. I guess it depends how you define number 1 wide receiver. To me, it's the guy who leads the team in targets, catches, yards, touchdowns.
Me too. It's not the conventional sense of who the X receiver is, right?
No.
Yeah, like
Kittle's wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I could give a rat's ass about it, honestly, because George Kittle is the number 1 target on this team. And so I look at it and I say, and this isn't to say that Brandon Ayuk isn't special. Like, I think, Grant, you were the first one saying that Brandon Ayuk is going to be a superstar during his first training camp. And I'm not saying like anybody who watched Ayuk last year saw a special football player. He looks special. He looks different in terms of how he moves. His body looks different as an athlete. He's a hell of a route runner, beats all kinds of coverage.
And he could become the focal point of their passing game at some point. He could. He absolutely could. But I don't think he is yet.
I don't think so either.
No.
And I think that's more because you have a George Kittle. And that's where I think like this conversation is a little bit out of hand because the receiver 1 on this offense is George Kittle. Now, is he the receiver 2? I think there'll be games he will be the receiver 2. I think there's games that Debo will be the receiver 2 in terms of target distribution, not based on who's the number 1 receiver on a progression or something like that. But at the same time, like the guy that's going to end up getting the football the most is going to be George Kittle. And people are saying I'm discrediting Ayuk's potential. Why? Because I don't think he's the next Julio Jones. Like, I don't think Brandon Ayuk is going to be the next Hall of Fame receiver who
How dare you?
outclasses Jerry Rice
So
in
negative
terms of yards
all
per
the time.
game. Like, come on. Oh, man, Grant, I only think Brandon Ayuk is going to be a really good receiver, but I think there's also a lot of really good young receivers in the NFL.
Okay. So Debo Samuel, glorified running back, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver one. This seems to be why a lot of Niner fans think Brandon Ayuk should not return punts, that he's way too important to the offense. He's the only real wide receiver on the team, and that they just can't afford to give him 2 punt returns a game. Do you agree with that? Or should he return punts?
I think he should return punts. I think it's not a sense of like the injury things. I just think it gives one of your best football players, right? I still think Brandon Ayuk is one of their best players on the team. I still think he's a hell of a football player, even though maybe I don't think he's Julio, But I think it gives one of your best players on your team one more opportunity to make a play on the field. That's all it is. That's all it really is. And yeah. I think one of the biggest things with the Niners is that their special teams is very conservative. It's a not to lose special teams rather than a special teams that wins them games, which is a little bit of a problem because the teams in their division do have special teams that win them games, right? Like you go back to week 1 against Arizona, the difference really in that football game besides Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins was that Arizona's special teams made a play. The Niners special teams didn't. The only special teams plays I can remember in the Niners era is Markin Zachua blocking a punt week or 3. I can remember 3. Marcel Harris forcing the fumble on Odell Beckham, which was kind of more of a product of Odell gripping the ball Michael Vick style than it was really Harris going after the football. Though to Harris's credit, it was a great play. Then Zachua block punt week 1 of 2019. And then the Richie James, I think he returned one for a touchdown. The Seattle game they won in 2018, he returned a kickoff for a touchdown, I want to say.
Yeah.
Those are the only ones I can remember off the top of my head. They're special teams. I mean, you go down the list. They have a kicker who's horrible at this point in his career from 50 yards plus. He's a really, really consistently good kicker from 45 yards and under.
True.
To me, that's conservative because you also pay him a lot of money for a kicker.
Yep.
You have a punter who's very, very good at punting from the 40 and landing the ball at the 15. He's very consistent at doing it. If you look at his deeper level stats, like punts inside the 20 net yard, all this, fair catches created, all of that stuff, I'm sure Mitch Wishnowsky, the analytics look good. But the thing is, Mitch Wishnowsky has never changed field position where you're punting from the 20 and he goes and downs the punt at the 9 or an 8. He doesn't change momentum of a football game, not to mention he's a bad kickoff specialist. Then you go down the return game. I mean, their punt returners and kickoff returners are known for 2 things. They're known for fair catches, and then they're known for doing the both arms go this way, this thing to signal that the ball went over their head for a touchback. That's what they do. They have no explosive plays from their return game whatsoever. I mean, Trent Taylor returned punts for a good portion of last year, for God's sake, and the best thing he could do was catch the punt cleanly. River Craycraft had one punt return, where there was like 10 yards, 15 yards of space ahead of him, and he had a fair catch. Where this becomes a problem is you look at the Rams, especially the Rams under McVay when Jim Fossil was there, and even last year, they have a special teams that's won them games, right? Johnny Hekker is an absolute weapon as a punter. Then you look in Seattle, Michael Dickinson is an absolute weapon as a punter. And then you look at Arizona, Andy Lee is still booming them, man.
Yes, he is.
Andy Lee is still kicking right through the ball. So, like, when you look at it like that, like, you got to find yourself a way to get any advantage in a football game. And that's where Brandon Ayuk returning punts gets you that advantage. And I buy the injury argument to an extent, but then you look at people like Antonio Brown returned punts for years upon years. Patrick Peterson returned punts for years. Julian Edelman returned punts for years.
Wes Welker.
Deion Sanders, Wes Welker. You can go down the list. So many
John Taylor,
even Odell Beckham. Whenever there was an important punt return, the Giants would just stick him back there and have
Deshaun Jackson.
Stephon Diggs, I think his last year in Minnesota was the punt returner for the Minnesota Vikings. Deshaun Jackson returned them for years. Tyreek Hill, to me, tomorrow, if McCole Hardman gets hurt, Tyreek Hill is returning punts for them, just given Dave Tobin, Andy Reid's history. So
thank you. It's because they're like, oh, well, Tyreek Hill doesn't do it anymore. He used to, and they replace him with someone who is also excellent. They're not just conceding that part of the game. They want to have a playmaker there. And it's like, well, the Niners average, they have guys who aren't fast returning punts. You should have guys who are a threat to take it the distance.
Right.
Like if you give Brandon Ayuk 30 chances at it, he might be able to crack 2 in a season.
And if you don't want Ayuk to return the punts, then there are punt return specialists in the NFL that you could pay a decent sum of money and have him be back there for kickoffs and punts. But the Niners don't do that, right? Like Jet McKinnon was their kick returner for a minute last year. And what explosion did Jet McKinnon have at that point last year? So when you look at it like that, I just don't see an argument where you make Debo, not Debo, Ayuk not return punts.
Here's one. James Foster says Ayuk is Isaac Bruce, and Bruce never returned punts. Who is returning punts? Craycraft, Sherfield, James, or Simba? Well, right now it's going to be Simba Webster, but let's stick with Ayuk is Isaac Bruce.
But Ayuk returned punts in college.
He did.
Isaac Bruce returned punts in college.
I don't know.
Just because Isaac Bruce didn't return college, oh God, Ayuk shouldn't. Just because Shanahan said that the way Ayuk moves is similar to Isaac Bruce, you could miss me with that. That makes no sense to me.
When Isaac Bruce was 23, he had 1,781
yards receiving. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of he's also in the Hall of Fame.
Who was the quarterback on that team? On that team?
I don't know. It was 1995. So that's
no. Click. Check. This is important.
Let me get it. Hold on. Let me get it. Chris Miller. Chris Miller. I've never heard of that guy. 1995.
Neither have I. First time I saw him was when I was looking up Isaac Bruce stats to talk about him when me and Jason Aponte talked about the all-time receiver list.
Yeah. Great receiver. Guy was really, really good. He was like Marvin Harrison, man. He was so good.
Do you remember him at 38 on the 49ers?
Yes.
He was their best offensive player that year besides Frank Gore.
Yes, he was. So, dude, 12 games. Brandon Ayuk, 12 games. And he's good. But, I mean, the idea – what I'm basically hearing from from the crowd that says don't let him return punts, they're saying he's too good. He's too good. And what I'm basically hearing is, so you're saying he's better than John Taylor. He's better than Deion Sanders. He's better than Antonio Brown. Like, what is too good? What are you talking about? Also, I'm hearing that it's too dangerous to return punts. I can't remember any serious injuries on punt returners. I'm sorry. I mean, it seems to me that everything you do in football is dangerous, but I don't think that returning a punt is more dangerous than running slants.
I think even if it's the scenario where anytime in a big moment you need him to return a punt, if that's how you're going to do it, then fine. Even that I'm comfortable with. But
because that's what the Cardinals did with Patrick Peterson, right?
Right. You can't. And the Deion Sanders, the same thing near the end of his career. But you can't have special teams always be the best case scenario is that your special teams plays dead even with the other team's special teams. You have to at some point get some sort of advantage. The Niners' kick return game is not an advantage. Their kicking game is conservative but solid. Their punting game is conservative but solid. And their punt return game is poor.
And there's that old adage that to win a football game, you need to win 2 of the 3 phases. And it's like the Niners don't try to win the special teams phase. So it puts them in a position where they have to win on offense and defense, which is hard.
And I think there are going to be games next year. I know people think that Brandon Ayuk is going to walk in next year and have 10 catches, 145 yards, and 3 touchdowns every game. But there are going to be games next year where just because of the fact that the Niners are going to be a run-first team, the fact that George Kittle and Debo do exist, the fact that, Trey Lance is going to run the football and Mostert and others are going to run the football and you're going to get a lot of carries in where Ayuk maybe doesn't see a lot of targets just because that's how the game's going.
Thank you.
Well, in a game like that, if it's a close football game, a way to get him going in the game could be to have him return a punt and get a big play out of the punt return.
Keep in mind, this is a run-first team with a quarterback who may be 21 coming off a season where he averaged 19 passes a game. All right? They're not going to throw a lot. And a lot of the passes are going to go to Kittle and Debo. And Debo's going to get extra touches in the run game. How is Ayuk going to get extra touches? How are you going to get Ayuk more than 4 touches a game if he's not returning punts? Because he should have. Honestly, if he were on a team that passed more, he'd be getting 10. He'd be getting 10 targets a game. He's not going to get that on the 49ers, not this team. So I think you should be looking for more. People say, "Oh, you're going to use him too much." No, I'm worried about not using him enough.
Exactly. There we go. That should be the argument, right?
Yeah. They're not going to use him enough next year if he's not involved in the return game. He's going to end up with like 65 catches. I don't know.
Because the biggest difference between him and these other guys is that, Debo's the glorified running back is a big part of this run game. Ayuk, I think one thing that we learned last year is that, Ayuk and Debo, a lot of people compared them when they came out and all of that. And yeah, Ayuk can still do the jet sweep end around stuff, but we saw very clearly in their usage when Debo was out and how Ayuk was used, which was more similar to how Shanahan's used receivers like the Julio Jones, the Andre Johnsons in the past, lining them up as the X receiver and having them run routes outside the number, than what they did with Debo. It wasn't like because Debo was out, they just took all his end around jet sweep, push pass plays and gave them to Ayuk and ran it with like that. And we saw the times Ayuk ran it, while he's smooth, he makes people miss. He's a strong runner. He's not anywhere close to Debo Samuel at running with the ball. So
my point about Pettis is maybe the reasoning why Ayuk won't return punts may be the same reason he didn't want Pettis returning. He may want to conserve his receivers for the offense. Well, yeah, but then Pettis fell out of the offense. Right? Yeah. And I think Pettis was actually physically,
Yeah, and Pettis didn't want to take hits, and he was he had a trouble fair catching a punt one of the first times they had him do it, which is why they went back. Also, Grant, I wanted to answer that previous question.
Yeah.
Because I do have an answer for it. It's no.
Okay, no.
And here's why it's no. It's because if you look at data tells you it's no. Shanahan's never had a receiver over 10-plus touchdowns in his entire career.
Wow.
Andre Johnson's had the most at 9. The most Julio Jones had was 8.
Yeah, it seems like he likes to use guys as decoys. Like, I mean, he's going to get the ball to his number one targets, but when it's time to score points, he's like, okay, you're going to work hard to take away Julio Jones or George Kittle, so I'm going to Kendrick Bourne. So I'm going to Kyle Juszczyk. I'm going to someone secondary here.
Yeah, he's never had this is important. Kyle Shanahan has never had a wide receiver catch 10-plus touchdowns in a season with him calling plays.
That's
the most
wild.
Is Andre Johnson at 9.
I mean, that's just a crazy stat. Like, Bill Walsh doesn't have a stat like that. Andy Reid doesn't have a stat like that. Sean Payton. Usually these offensive gurus have some guys with crazy numbers. Like Devontae Adams put up 18 touchdowns last year. I mean, there were years like that for Jerry Rice, but Kyle is it must be a philosophy. So interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, but his red zone numbers, if you go through his 13 years as a coordinator, the average red zone efficiency for him and his offense is 19
subpar.
in the NFL.
Subpar.
Do you mind if we answer Jesse Rodriguez's question right here?
Johnny Knox's back injury is why I don't want Ayuk returning punts.
Well, then I don't want Ayuk playing receiver either, and Debo being a glorified running back because of Brad Smith's injury. Yeah. And then I don't want Ayuk playing receiver because of the millions of injuries we have had receivers get.
Yeah, like Niner fans are so concerned. They're so concerned about Ayuk returning a punt, but Debo, go play running back. Running backs get hurt. Punt returners, I mean, it's like if there's anyone close to you, you just do the fair catch and no one can touch you. You can see everyone coming. There's no one going to hit you from behind. It really seems like actually just as dangerous as anything else in football.
Yeah, I mean, football is inherently dangerous. Like you can't have a player avoid a player getting hurt. If you're trying to avoid him getting hurt, there's a chance he's going to get hurt. Like you can get hurt doing anything in football. So I don't know why one person's injury now makes it impossible. Like Navarro Bowman's knee injury means I don't want Fred Warner tackling anybody near the goal line.
I can think of many more examples of wide receivers getting injured, catching a pass over the middle than I can think of off the top of my head of a punt returner getting blasted because he didn't call a fair catch or something.
I mean, I can think of Brandon Ayuk getting injured 3 times playing just wide receiver last year.
Thank you.
The core muscle injury after he came into the draft, then he had the hamstring during training camp, and then he finished it off with the ankle injury.
For good measure. Okay, final topic. Enough of the punt return stuff. I made my point. We made our point. This is an interesting point, and I don't know what it's about. I mean, I don't know what led us here, but we're not going to have an opportunity during training camp. So let's talk about it now. I guess it was the Fred Warner thing. The Niners side Fred Warner, and it brought up a lot of feelings about DeForest Buckner. And a lot of people were saying, like, see, it's more reason that they should have signed Buckner. He's just like Warner. And I think, well, I'll let you take it the rest of the way, Vish.
Yeah, so if you remember, we had this conversation. So there's really two backdrops to this conversation. I'll give them real quick just for the sake of context so people know where we're coming from. And the first one is we had this conversation maybe, I want to say 1 month ago. We talked about all the 49ers moves under the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch era, what they should have done differently, what was the correct answer, all of that. And we talked about re-signing DeForest Buckner. And I said I still believe they made the right decision signing DeForest Buckner, but then I brought up the fact that I also thought at the time that they shouldn't re-sign Eric Armstead either. And I wanted to continue that conversation. And the only reason why is because you and I met for the first time in person this weekend.
That's right.
And the only time we talked about football is we were mostly talking about his Kia Stinger. It is really as beautiful. As
we actually did mostly not talk about football, to our credit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about football once in the night. And the one time we talked about football was, for whatever reason, it was DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. Actually, I know for what reason. A lot of you guys might know Jamal Armstrong, who's in this comment section. He also met up with us.
Yes.
He asked you about Buckner because he said that still pisses me off that they didn't re-sign Buckner with this Warner deal, this exact thing. And that's where I then brought up why I would not have signed either. So going with that.
You're cool with them trading Buckner. I mean, I feel like there's an argument on the 49ers' favor that they did the right thing, and we can talk about that later. But your point is that it wasn't an either or. The signing Armstead is far less defensible.
Yeah. Like, I think paying Buckner was trading Buckner was a great move. I think drafting Kinlaw at 13, I think it's great value. I really do. I just don't see why you sign Eric Armstead, even though he's an extremely good player. I'm not doubting that. I'm just going to talk a little bit of financials. So again, before I get into this, the best conversation about this exact thing, it was on Mina Kimes' podcast, a guy named Coach Voss, football coach who loves Bill Belichick, Vic Fangio, studies them a ton. He broke down this entire topic and my thoughts on it better than I ever could. So you definitely should listen to that because he'll break down why you don't pay any defensive lineman. I'm not there. I think there's only a specific style of defensive lineman you paid. But without further ado, let's get into why I don't think they should have paid Eric Armstead. So for me, when you're paying NFL players, like highly paid players, right? The first thing you start off with is, I think, in my opinion, you want to pay guys who are transcendent at their position. So, Aaron Donald's, Jalen Ramsey's, I'd say Fred Warner fits within this category. I think especially defensive players. Myles Garrett fits in this category. Just guys that are just way better than everybody else at their position. Then you want to start paying guys who play premium positions, right? That's why the 15th best quarterback gets paid. That's why the 10th best edge rusher gets paid, because premium positions, the 12th best left tackle gets paid. Premium positions have a greater impact on the game, even with above average players. That's why in this exact context, I would pay the 10th best edge rusher in the NFL, whether it's Shaq Barrett, whether it's Zadarius Smith, whether it's one of those Brian Burns, whether it's Chase Young, before I would pay DeForest Buckner, the third or fourth best defensive tackle in the NFL at $20 million. Because I just think an edge rusher is more impactful. DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead were part of a 49ers defensive line in 2017 and 2018 that used to get owned. That used to get zero pressure on the quarterback. You add in D Ford and Nick Bosa, and both guys, DeForest Buckner was already a hell of a player, had another hell of a season, but it was a more impactful season thanks to those two players. And Eric Armstead, who was a good player who struggled to finish plays, all of a sudden had 10.5 sacks in a season, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's where, I look at the D Ford contract in contrast to this entire conversation. And D Ford's injuries are obviously the biggest impediment. But if you looked at D Ford's talent and said pay him $17 million a season, I'm okay with that because I think D Ford changes the game that much. I mean, you can look at the Niners defensive line splits, even with Bosa, Armstead, and Buckner, who are all way above average at their position. You can look at the impact one player, D Ford, had on the three of them relative to, when Ronnie Blair or whoever else played with them. My second argument is I think interior defensive linemen or guys that get pressure in from the interior are a little more dime a dozen in the NFL, especially if you have special edge players. I love the way DJ Jones has played for the 49ers last 2 years. I think he's been above average. I thought Kevin Givens played really well last year. I'm high on Javon Kinlaw. Zach Kerr was just signed, and he's a good player. He's a good player against the run, and he's very okay against the pass. Maurice Hurst has big-time talent. So that's 6 guys I just named on this roster to me that are serviceable as interior defensive linemen. None of them are as good as Eric Armstead rushing inside. And Armstead will make a bigger impact rushing inside. The thing is, paying Armstead $20 million to me limits your flexibility in terms of your secondary. And that's where the second part of this argument gets to. Currently, the 49ers basically have one starting level corner, that a guy that started consistently, and that's Verrett, and played like a starter consistently, right? Mosley, we believe that can be that guy, but Mosley had some poor games last season. Ambry Thomas is a third-round rookie who didn't play in 2019. Then you're left with Dante Johnson's, Diamador Lenore's, not guys you really look at as with the expectation to start. Well, if you're not paying Eric Armstead $20 million, and this is what Coach Voss talks about, right? You don't pay a defensive lineman. Instead of paying Eric Armstead, not this year, he's still at $12.5 million. The second part of his contract, which is where he reaches the $12 million, even though cap goes up, even though Trey Lance's deal goes up, you're still paying Eric Armstead a giant sum of money, which I'm sure another team would have paid him. But if you let another team pay him and you go and you get another solid defensive line type, you have a highly paid defensive line coach. The star of your defensive line is Bosa, not Armstead. So he can be the highly paid guy. Last year, Fred Warner showed that even with a defensive line that doesn't always get pressure, when you have the coverage ability between Warner, Jimmy Ward, and Jason Verrett, you can do a lot of creative things on defense. That's what the Patriots have shown for years, which is why they won 2 Super Bowls after trading Chandler Jones. Shocking, right? One of the best edge players in the NFL. And so if you can be creative with your defense and how your defense covers, you can do things like that. And that's where you already have a Bosa. That's where if you don't pay him and you get a starting caliber corner next to Jason Verrett, you add a little more depth. All of a sudden, I think the entire what your defense can do and how your defense plays changes. And that's why, to me, even though Eric Armstead is a hell of a football player, I'm not here to discredit him as a football player. He just happens to be the title of this conversation because we're talking 49ers. The real title of this conversation to me is that you don't pay tweener defensive linemen or really interior defensive linemen that aren't really named Aaron Donald a $20 million plus contract unless they're truly, or I would say any defensive player, you don't pay him that sum of money unless they're an edge rusher or they're a truly transcendent talent.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're saying here is unless you're a real factor against the pass in this league, even if you're a hell of a run defender, you're pretty much replaceable. Armstead's a good hell of a run defender, but he's just not a consistent enough force against the pass, and that means that the Niners, maybe they felt that the fan base couldn't stomach losing both Buckner and Armstead in the same offseason, but there's really no scenario in which the Niners should have given Armstead.
You know what the funny thing is? The exact philosophical change I wanted them to make, they made on defense because Nick Bosa got hurt,
Yeah.
They were no longer a rush 4, drop 7 defense. Right. Robert Saleh became very creative. They became a split safety coverage defense. They ran a lot of very, very interesting coverages, actually, if you go back and watch them. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that, Ward could cover the way Ward could cover, Verrett could cover the way Verrett could cover, and Warner could cover the way Warner. Those were really the 3 guys. And so if you look at that exact same situation, at least we have the bias of knowing Bosa was hurt. But if you look back and just imagine if instead of paying the sum of money to Armstead, they dished out and maybe signed another corner, they might have had a top 3 defense in the NFL last year. And that's nothing against Armstead, who's still a hell of a football player. It just means that I'm telling you, basically, this is what it comes down to. I'd rather have a defense if you're talking about a defensive line. And if you tell me I have to spend $45 million on my defensive line, like that's what the 49ers want to spend. I'd rather have a defense that has Nick Bosa, D Ford, and has DJ Jones and Kevin Givens than I would have a defense that has Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner, and 3 Kerry Hivers.
Fair. The Niners had that for a while, and they showed that if you only have interior pressure and no edge pressure, it's really easy for a quarterback to just hang back. He doesn't have to step up in the pocket. Those defensive tackles just don't usually get there in time. So I see. And that's part of the reason why I prefer a Chris Jones or a Aaron Donald, or obviously everybody prefers Aaron Donald. The reason I prefer Chris Jones to DeForest Buckner is one of my biggest pet peeves with DeForest Buckner is I always think it takes him he always ends up making plays. He's an excellent run defender, excellent pass rusher. Like DeForest Buckner is one of the better players in the NFL at
defensive or in the entire league in terms of defensive line, and he's a top 3 or 4 defensive tackle in the league. But I don't think he screws up plays quickly enough. The way Chris Jones, there are plays where he's so big, so strong, he just shoves.
Aaron Donald does, yeah.
Right. Aaron Donald, how many times do we see him just end plays like right off the snap?
And that's what Warren Sapp was like back in the day, to an extent. Yeah,
because you need more. To me, those plays are game changers. They're drive killers. If you put a team in 2nd and 15 because you just split a double team and tackle the back for a 5-yard loss, that drive is done.
Okay, real quick, because we got to wrap up soon, but we have a couple of questions. Vince says, well, hold on, before I get to that, I guess the main takeaway here is that while most people feel the major mistake was trading Buckner, what you want to say is the major mistake, that was actually defensible. The major mistake was signing Armstead. That did not need to happen. Did not need to happen. And it's
I wouldn't call it a mistake because Armstead's a really good player, but I would call it. I think that it was.
That's the questionable decision.
I think it was an opportunity. I think it was an opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Real quick, we'll answer these questions. Vince says, "I get that," or if it's a question, if it's not a question, Vince says, "I get that Kyle wants to be the star of the offense, and he doesn't want any player to outshine him. That's why he disliked the Jimmy hype in 2017, 2019. I feel like Kyle does have that reputation, so it'd be interesting to see how things go with him and Trey Lance. We'll see. He can prove that wrong with Trey Lance. Be interesting. We'll see. Hard to say, but yeah, I can see why you would come to that conclusion. Brandon says, honest expectations of D Ford this year. Did Fred Warner's comments change your mind at all? Great question. What do you think?
Yeah, so I knew a little bit that there should have been expectations that D Ford's been looking good and all of that a little bit before.
Yeah,
I did know that a little bit before. I think I told you, one of the only people I told about it in February, that he was looking really good.
And I didn't say anything.
Yes, you're the man for that. But
yes.
It didn't change my mind, and here's why.
Mostly because I don't really make much of it.
It's like, oh my God, breaking news. D Ford's body looks good. No, that's not breaking news. Fred Warner talking about it in June is more important. Obviously, it's not that important. But so I'm not going to sit here and act like, I'm a big no, like that's not a big deal. But the point I wanted to say is I don't think it changes my mind at all, because D Ford looking good in June is not a problem, right? Last year, I think most people said he looked great in camp in terms of his body. The question is, can he play football managing the injuries that he has, which are chronic?
Yeah, the question is September, October, November, December. He's the man in June. He is the MVP of June and July.
Yeah.
No doubt.
And it's been a question with surrounding D Ford his entire career, right? When you look at the D Ford contract, the trade for D Ford, nobody questions paying that much for that player, right? A second-round pick for a guy who's an edge rusher that wins the way D Ford wins, worth it. $17 million for an edge rusher that can dominate games the way D Ford does, worth it.
Yes.
Why did the Kansas City Chiefs not pay him? This reason right here.
Yes.
He was managing a knee injury the entire season with Kansas City. So this is the big question with D Ford, right? And to me, Fred Warner saying he looks good, right, with his knee and back doesn't change anything, because he has to actually play football through it, which is a big ask of him. Respect to him, the fact that he seems to come out every year willing to play through injuries, trying to attempt it at least. Hopefully he can manage it, but I have to see that one to believe it.
That's our show. Thank you very much, Vish, and everyone for watching. This is the last day of the offseason. I'm so excited. We're going to have all kind of stuff to talk about. My schedule the next couple of weeks is going to be totally jumbled because I'm driving down to Santa Clara every day, and I'm probably going to be in the media room. And just know, for the Twitch folks out there, sorry I didn't do it today, but get ready for like post-practice Twitches where we can all have a group discussion and whoever wants to join can. But until then, wait, 2 days practice.
I can't wait for your good, not so good. I have a sneaky suspicion that Josh Rosen is going to be a member that makes the good quite often. I just have a sneaking suspicion that
I'll be
you
honest
might be
with
the only person.
I'll be honest with Josh, but I'm gonna be watching him closely. I'll be watching him closely.
More than good, not so good. Let me rephrase that. I have a sneaking suspicion that you're the only reporter that's going to have him on the list the entire offseason.
Everything he does will be chronicled on this YouTube channel. Don't worry. Don't worry. If he picks his nose, I'll have it first. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
And if he goes 2 for 2, hitting one throw to River Craycraft and one throw to
Canton.
Yeah.
He's the next Kurt Warner.
All over
Hey, if
it.
Brandon Ayuk's the next Isaac Bruce, why can't Josh Rosen be the next Y.A. Tittle? I don't see why not.
I hate throwing out those comparisons, man. I hate them. Like Ayuk is a hell of a talent. He might be a next superstar, but Bruce is a Hall of Famer.
Those comparisons make you want to dislike the players. Like, man, Brandon Ayuk didn't even do anything, and all of a sudden I'm rolling my eyes. It's like, it's not Brandon's fault. Brandon, it's not your fault.
It's more because Shanahan said it, right? But Shanahan didn't say he's the next Isaac Bruce. He said specific ways on the way he moves. That's Isaac Bruce to me. There's a difference between comparing a player's stylistic and athletic talents to a specific player rather than comparing like what his career and dominance and level of success is going to be.
Thanks, Raymond. I'll remember. I'll bring my hat too. I'm a vet, man. This is my 11th training camp. What?
What's this? Oh, he's telling. Don't forget the sunscreen, player,
direct address. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought the sunscreen player was like a thing, and I was like, "Oh crap! Is this another thing from the '90s that I'm gonna see on Twitter?" Like, "Oh, great reference, Grant." That one totally went over Vish's head.
Oh man! All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Vish. Next Monday they'll be doing practice, so we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll wait for the next off day. We'll figure it out. We will figure this out.
And we'll get you on one of these days before the weekends to talk about practice. I mean, it is practice, but we got to talk about practice.
Practice? It's best time of the year, my favorite time of the year. Thank you, everyone. Definitely. I will see you later.